To the Ignite sponsored webinar about the Ignite Registry. I am joined today by two men, both of whom may need no introduction, but I will do anyway. So Philippe Genereux is on the line with us today. He's been published in over 400 journals, as well as been an investigator in over 20 trials. We're delighted to have him here today with us to talk about his work with the Ignite Registry and the Ignite team. He is joined by Mike Dobbles, who is our Chief Data Officer and has vast experience on the data side. And I am Kahla Verhoef, our Chief Operating Officer. I have the distinct pleasure of moderating today's session. So for the next 30 minutes, we'll take you through a little bit of a behind the scenes on some of the publications that Dr. Genereux has been involved in, what the data set looked like for those publications, how it was different, etc. Just a quick housekeeping item for those on the phone. The chat will be open for the audience to submit questions. We will likely not have time for live Q&A at the end, but please feel free to submit questions regardless so that we can either include answers to those in follow-up webinars or connect with you individually if that's appropriate. So with that, we will dive right into our first set of questions. Dr. Genereux, to start us off, can you share with the audience a little bit about how you first started working with Ignite?
Kahla and Mike, first of all, always a pleasure to discuss with you. I have to say I was very lucky. I think is maybe 5 or 7 years ago, I can recall. Time fly that I was at TVT. It was called TVT at the time in Vancouver, I believe, where Jessica Newfield, who's working as well with Ignite, one of the co-founder, approached me to say that they had a new product, a software that can help triage patient and decipher, who will be great for a trial or who will need to be treated faster. And they were developing this AI/, natural language processing workflow to help to assist clinical practice, but also trials enrollment. So I was very intrigued initially. I said, that sounds like a great idea. So I literally tried the software, convinced my institution actually to use it, and literally really saw the value of Ignite and CardioCare into streamlining patients, screening patient, and who could be good for a randomized trial or the other. So for me, that was really the first contact I had, was really to kind of solve an unmet need into increasing enrollment in randomized trial, and also increasing or I would say efficiency to see patients that need treatment sooner than later. So I really was seduced by this triage capacity and stratification capacity of Ignite, where you have a full view of your community, all the echocardiogram actually that are done in our community at around Morristown Medical Center or Ignite Health System, all our 6 hospitals. I know exactly how many severe AS I have, how many severe AS with symptom, how many severe AS no symptom, how many moderate AS patient I have, and mild AS, or either any other disease. So I have a map of all my patients, and I was really pleased with this. And this is how we start to use this CardioCare or Ignite to identify patients that could benefit of a randomized trial, such as early TAVR or Progress or any other trial, or Genabal, for example, with aortic regurgitation. So that was the first time I was exposed to Ignite as an unmet need and a way to improve patient triage and enrollment in trials. And slowly but surely, I got exposed to Mike, I call it Super Mike, where we start to brainstorm and say, maybe I would like to, because you have like 5 million at the time, echo, and I'm sure it's more now, but can we test the hypothesis that I have and to check if it's true in your real world data set, and then maybe to validate my hypothesis that I have to design a randomized trial before we went the wrong way, and also to validate what a randomized trial just proved, but to validate it in a large real world setting. So I think that's how I get really engaged with Ignite for both those reasons. One, the randomized trial capacity of screening patient and patient care really in the real world. And the other one is the capacity to access a large real world database that can answer so many questions that randomized trial will not be able to do, because
Yeah.
randomized trial are great, but sometimes are really, really precise and pinpoint a question and sometimes lose the real world setting aspect of it. So,
Yeah. So you all have had tremendous results using the platform in clinical practice to identify patients for commercial therapies as well as clinical trials. If we turn specifically to the data piece, which was your second piece there, you've now published with Ignite data on cardiac damage, AS mortality, the AR burden of disease, acute valve syndrome. Tell the audience a little bit about how you worked with the data and with Mike and team to support these research questions.
yeah.
Where did they come from? Why did you think this would be a good data set match for exploring that?
Yeah, I always say that behind every paper, at least every paper I wrote, there's a story. Sometimes more spicy than other, but there's always a story about a question about real life. Okay, and the way actually I function, or for me it works, is for example the mortality burden of AS, which is one of the first paper we published together, which is highlight in Jack. Um, so this one was really I saw Jeff Strange and David Playford Jack paper from the Australia database using their database, showing that AS was associated with mortality even in moderate AS patient, and you have this gradation in mortality with mild, moderate, severe, and this was in the Australia database. And I said, well, we need to replicate this with more patient in US as well. And that was the time where I was thinking about designing progress trials for the moderate AS trials. So I said, we really need to make sure that the mortality in moderate AS is at least more elevated than mild and similar to severe, so we can justify a randomized trial. So this is where I spoke with Jess and Mike and say, would it be possible to validate this in US with almost 2 million echo and patient, um, if there's, yes, a gradation of patient with mild, moderate to severe in mortality and outcome, so we can justify a randomized trial in moderate. So I just literally draft my hypothesis, my synopsis, and what I was thinking, my question, and I discussed with Mike and Jessica and the team of Ignite, and we just ran the paper. And I will say that what is very good with this paper, where we see the gradation in mortality in mild, moderate, no AS, mild AS, moderate AS, severe AS, is we have much more granular data than I will say the Australian database, because we have the natural language processing of really assessing what the physician assess. So, and we have
Right.
15% of the patient that are in between mild, moderate, severe. You have moderate to severe patient, and then you have mild to moderate patient. So we were able to be granular into what was reported in the real world and see the same trend that our colleague and friends from Australia reported. And this is what fueled literally the progress study into validating that there's potentially a signal in patient that may benefit of an intervention, even if they're quote unquote only moderate. And that's what resulted in I would say, a very great paper in real world setting,
Yeah.
justifying and justifying and substantiating a trial.
Mike,
Let me
something to add
weigh
there?
in on that, because I tell you, our data is particularly strong in this area. It's because we're fully taking every bit of information out of the echo procedure report, all the measures and all of that, but also interpreting the findings section, finding out what did the reading cardiologists actually write down and diagnose the patient. And I'm familiar with the Australian database. It's more measure focused. It's a fine thing, but it's just pretty limited. And I'm also familiar with when I tried to do similar research, prior to Ignite, using the Optum database, and it just wasn't great at pulling out valve severities and things like that, because it's you have to be pretty specialized to get all the nuances of how reading cardiologists will talk about disease in their findings, and that's kind of our bread and butter.
And I will say that what Mike said is very important, because what we have, for example, in a randomized trial, when you have echocardiogram assessed by a core lab, and they come with mild, moderate, severe, and they use criteria, aortic valve area, mean gradient, peak velocity, DI index, like all those criteria that the guideline report. But a lot of time there's discordance. It's very frequent, that the AVA and the mean gradient doesn't match. 0.9 AVA, 26 mean gradient, DI 0.24. So is it moderate? Is it severe? And this is what the data capture in real life, where it's what the physician call moderate to severe, or what the physician call mild to moderate. So I think egnite is able to capture this granularity. Yes, they have the number, but they also have the integration of the echo report and the chart, and what the summation of those. So I think this real world assessment is equally important than a very robust randomized trial where you use core lab with someone who adjudicated everything, but is very classified patient as mild, moderate, or severe. But there's this gray zone, and I think this is what, when you have a lot of patient like Ignite has, over 50 center or even maybe 75 now, with almost 5 million echo, this is what you get. You get like the big picture, even if you have gray zone, and you can literally focus on the gray zone. I believe this is where the unmet need is, in patient population, in the gray zone, where the physician doesn't know, is it moderate, is it severe? And this is what we extract from the first JACC paper, is those in between diagnosis carry some prognostic impact, because some moderate to severe AS patient will be followed clinically like a moderate, and then they're going to develop heart failure or even die, because actually, as a matter of fact, they were severe. And so some people would be more moderate, some people would be more severe. So I think this is what we extract. And the snapshot of the reality is very important for the guidelines. So yes, we have the dogmatic view of AS severity as like mild, moderate, severe, but in real life, I can tell you there's probably 30% of the patient we don't know if they're moderate, severe, or mild. They're in between classes. And I think this is what this paper is about this unmet need in between, the discordant variable. And that's why we designed the severe AS no symptom patient trial early TAVR. This is why we designed Progress, which is moderate AS with that risk feature. And this is why we design others that will come. Stay tuned. But my point is really, it's all start from real world data assessment and picking signal that said, well, I think this is why there's under treatment of patient. I think this is why there's increased mortality as moderate AS, because as a matter of fact, they're severe or they're moderate with really high risk feature. So this is all from real world signal, and that of course we need to validate in a randomized trial. But the first step a lot of time is to take a good look at the reality in the real world. And when you have 5 million echo, it's easier to see trend. So.
I think it's, I liked how Dr. Genereux just said, of course we need to validate that in the clinical trial. As a data scientist, I get, I'm biased, but I also like the opposite. Clinical trials are great, randomized, and the core labs and all that, so precise, and you screen and you get exactly the patients, and you can learn something. But I love the opposite. Let's validate what you saw in the clinical trial also applies in the real world, because the real world is not a core lab, and there's no, the screening is not as rigorous and all that other sort of stuff. I think they're two perspectives that are really important.
I cannot agree more with this, because the ecosystem a randomized trial, and it's all a randomized trial like that. You exclude sometime up to 50, 60, 70% of the patient that doesn't fit the criteria of the trial, right? For example, early TAVR, where patients that were suitable for transfemoral TAVR. So we exclude the one that were not suitable. Okay. Same thing with Progress. So there's question that do or answer with randomized trial that are very specific to one type of patient. But then to your point, Mike, how does it apply in real world? The patient that were not included in the trial, will they have the same prognosis, worse or better, and will they benefit the most of the trial or not? So I think trial are really their own ecosystem, but we live in a real life. So I think this is why both those data are important, and I think observational data with small number of patients obviously are really, really limited. But I would say observational data with really large sample size, where you have very well construct hypothesis and way to control bias and adjust for this, I think give you at least a snapshot of the reality, and then you can decide how to integrate this piece of information. Even if they're not as causal, like you cannot conclude about causality,
That's
obviously,
right.
but you can see a trend and you can see a phenomenon that need to be addressed because we live in the real world. We don't live in a randomized trial.
There's we've got an open call for science that's going on right now. So I'm looking at a lot of things that are being submitted by researchers out there right now. And, some of what it was submitted was, uh, you know, here's this randomized controlled trial. And they want to ask the question, and how, is the real world performing, the way it did in the trial? And I don't know. I thought, well, some of those I saw, I said, that's interesting. I like personally kind of would like to know if, how that stacks up. I won't know until we get in it if that one gets selected. But yeah, there's a lot of interesting questions that you can answer with data like this.
So, Dr. Genereux, I'm curious from your perspective, is this the way forward with big, interesting research questions in terms of using a significant size registry data set to give you a directional signal and then follow it up with the clinical trial? Do you see that also going the other way? Is this the new way that research gets done?
I think for me, both will always be necessary because yes, you want to have the strong and robust evidence of a randomized trial. The problem is those trials are extremely expensive. They take time. So if we can have a way to answer a lot of questions, and there's some question that will never be answered or not appropriate for a randomized trial, right? Um, we don't have to prove everything by a randomized trial, but
Yeah.
for me, it's a mix. Of course, if you have a new device and a new strategy and you want to compare it to what is the gold standard, I think, yes, the randomized trial is great. But then if you want to assess this benefit in other type of population and or as overall, and maybe identify population that may benefit more than others about this, I think that's give you important piece of information. And I think definitely with AI and natural language processing, I think we will find new way to prove efficacy and safety of treatments compared to standard of care, which will be not as cumbersome and then randomized trial. And if you so I think for me that's why I love big data and or say big data set retrospective. They serve a different purposes, but I think they are very, very meaningful and piece of information. And again, not every question has to be answered with a randomized trial. And a lot of time we are questioning the prior dogma. When you look at the level of evidence of the prior dogma, there's none. There's none. There's no randomized trial. And we're going to talk about the Brunwell curve actually, and all we learn in medicine have been derived sometime from absolutely very, very little evidence. It was just description of phenomenon and speculation. So then we're an era where randomized trial is king, and then everything, oh, it's not randomized data. But at some point, like you cannot have randomized trial about every question. That's
Yeah.
why when you have 5 million echo compared to 47 patient with the Brunwell curve, of course you can see things differently. Of course, I think Brunwell was a visionary and actually was probably was almost right, with the evolution of AS in terms of a crash and burning patient,
Right.
they develop acute symptoms and what I call acute bowel syndrome. But when you wait too long, yes, you describe it. I mean, when you wait too long, people have when they have symptoms, they don't do well. So and we validate this with ignite, what we call acute bowel syndrome. If you wait too long, you're going to crash like the Brunwell curve speculate. So I think for me, we have a responsibility to use large data to kind of look back in the past and say, well, this was derived from not a lot of substantiate, but not a lot of evidence. Then you have a large data set that showed that, something different, and then let's prove it in a randomized trial. So I think
I think the best use of it would be if one were doing all the best practices, you know, before you went to a trial, you'd have an upfront kind of exploration. if you're going to go to a trial, then you use that to inform a randomized trial, and then you follow up. And, I know Kahla has experienced this as well. We see it here at Ignite. Every now and again, we get a life sciences company coming to us who's trying to, rescue a trial that's maybe enrolling slowly or something like that, and I can't help, like, if someone had done a little bit more real world exploration ahead of time, you can do a lot of prediction of how that trial would go. Some of the, by the time you've kind of locked in, and if you haven't done that, then the results you're going to get are kind of preset by your study protocol. And if it's not as informed as well as you could, you can go a little bit off track.
So one thing I really like about Ignite, and actually that's what's part of our first JACC paper on the mortality burden of AS, is the undertreatment piece, right? So everybody say, oh, there's a massive undertreatment of severe AS with symptom, and you have up to 40%. Only 60% were treated or referred for treatment. And for me, those data are okay. Why? So then when you look why, and you look at what type of patient were not referred, what were their disease, the comorbidity, or their demography, well, you realize that let's pretend 30% of those are appropriately not referred because they're 96 years old, they have dementia, they have cancer. So that's very informative, right? But then you stay with a high proportion, let's say 70% of this 40% that actually are literally not referred. So then, and this is what carry a lot of time the mortality of AS, which is untreated or refer late, and we treat them when they're really in bad spot. So for me, it's like, okay, yes, we have a randomized trial, or let's say that yes, TAVR is as good as SAVR. Yes, we have a randomized trial that showed that early treatment is good. And then you say, oh, everybody should have a stress test, and then you realize like nobody's doing a stress test in real life. Nobody refers severe AS with symptoms. So it's kind of a humbling phenomenon. It's a humbling exercise to say, whoa, what happened in real life? So I think if you want to improve patient outcome, as a community level, well, you need to look why those patients are not referred or not treated, and you will find interesting findings. Sorry. So, is the demography, or is this a certain type of practice that don't refer, or is it some people that believe that we can still wait with AS? So, I think this is for me the most important thing that we learn from large data is how reality hit, compared to yes, the great randomized trial that tell you to treat earlier.
Yeah, both great points. So Mike and Philippe, just given the discussion today, how would you counsel? We know that there's lots of clinicians, research fellows that have interesting research questions. Mike just highlighted a couple that he's seen recently through our Call for Science. How would you counsel them to think about using a resource like the Ignite Registry to start answering some of those questions? And I would say specifically, are there types of questions that are best suited for registry access and doing some similar activities like the ones that you've done?
I'll take it a little bit. I mean, I as we were saying, I love the real world data, and there's so many great things. But yeah, there, like Dr. Genereux said, there are certain things where it kind of it's not quite appropriate for observational data, where you're really trying to get hardcore about causality. Although you can do it, there's some techniques there that you can get a pretty good target trial emulations and these other kind of mathematical techniques that'll let you even get some hints on causality. But every now and again there's somebody will come to me with something where track EFs over time, and which is a good thing. We've got that because we have great longitudinal data, but you end up in a real world data set having bias of who's getting follow up at certain points, and that's hard to detangle in a retrospective analysis. That would be perfectly good to do in a randomized controlled trial, and everybody has a protocol and everybody follows the same things. But when people are not coming there for a trial are coming there to help you do your study. They're coming here because they're getting real care in a real way. You're going to see them when you're going to see them because they came in for this and they followed up for that, and then they got this lab here and that there, and that's great. But you have to make sure that you can tease that out. But that's that's why we have analysts who are good at doing that.
And maybe Kahla, I can add what I think the way I
Please
use
do.
Ignite, and if I have to give advice to younger cardiologists or even some more senior, who knows. But I think for me, it's good to large database like that are good to inform the current guidelines. So sometimes you have recommendation that are level 2, A or B, and level B or C evidence, no randomized trial, just pure consensus of expert. So I think this is important to say, hey, how those recommendations apply in real world. For example, when you say, oh, we're going to follow moderate AS every 1 to 2 years. Okay, why 1 to 2 years, for example? 2 years seems long for me. While some people with moderate AS may be okay to be followed every 2 years, some people may be just on the border. You have to follow them every 6 months. So I think just to, for example, to look at, okay, how frequently moderate AS patients are followed and who's following, who progress faster, who should be followed more closely than 2 years or 1 year. For me, this is where the real world data can help. Because again, not everything could be a randomized trial. So
Right.
this is where the power of those data are when you say, okay, let's see how people are followed with moderate AS. Let's see who progress faster. So I think this type of question. So for me, I always look at the guideline 2A, 2B, and level of evidence B or C that are weak, and then you try to challenge them. And sometimes those become class 1 2, 3 years later, and when you do a randomized trial. Same thing, sometimes class 3 become class 2A because we developed those class 3 while the 50 years ago.
Sure.
So I think that's for me how it could inform.
I mean, I'll throw in one other. I don't know, what percentage of our audience has, technical capabilities or not, but as a data scientist, I think we're kind of entering a golden age for what you can do with this type of data, with all of the large language models and all the other stuff that digs through stuff or even helps you, give me a thought partner on a research question or a particular bit of code. It's not going to do it for you, but we're in an age where, if you have the data and you have the question, boy, you can get the answers a lot easier than you could when I was doing this 5 years ago, 6 years ago. I mean, it just has gotten the ability to just extract insights. They can be very powerful. They can be published. They can do. I mean, it's just getting. It's a very exciting time to be in this space.
I
So
agree.
I'll move us into our final question here with 2 minutes left on the clock. I think you both naturally highlighted what types of questions you think that real world data sets like the Ignite registry will be most helpful in answering. I've heard you highlight changes in guidelines. I've heard you highlight practice patterns that might point you towards observational themes and surveillance. Uh, are there any other use cases that either of you can think of that you think a data set like this will be really a practical solution in helping answer?
And maybe I can start. For me, is patient stratification and patient triage. So again, when a randomized trial established a new, recommendation or led to a new recommendation, it's kind of one size fit all, but all patients are really different. And the example of follow-up is key. For me to model progression, is this patient will progress faster than another? Does this patient need closer care? So I think this is where those large data set, with the help of Ignite, AI, and NLP and capacity to see to predict how patient will progress, I think this is where we are. I think AI in general will help to identify patients that need closer care, closer information, closer follow-up, or sooner intervention. So that's where I'm extremely excited about the next 10, 15 years, because that's going to help to tell patient you need to be followed in 5 months.
Sure.
Not everybody 1 to 2 years. For me, this cookie cutter thing for each patient need to be adapted, and this is where AI and platform like Ignite can help, and that's what I'm excited to design or to prove, which will lead to patient improvement in healthcare. Yeah.
We're
Great.
out of time, but I'll throw in just one more. What I think, what questions are best to be answered is, there's so many questions that could be answered. It's hard to pull it down, but tracking mortality or tracking hospitalizations or tracking somebody who has a low EF or tracking, these are all very very interesting and doable types of things. But sometimes just even knowing, how many, what is the percentage of patients that have this plus this stuff that's not, super analytically hard, but would inform like kind of a market size or a what your clinical trial enrollment's going to look like. Those are all things that are, pretty straightforward to answer if, somebody comes and just asks a question.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you both for moderating a lively discussion today about the Ignite Registry and how you've used this real-world data set to answer important questions for the audience. The publications that we've talked about are on Ignite's website, as is the link to the Call for Science that both Mike and Dr. Genereux hit on earlier. So thank you for joining us, and stay tuned for future content. Thanks,
Thank you.
Mike. Thanks,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Genereux.
Thank you so much, both.